All right. Hello to anybody who wants to join in this conversation and learn a little bit from each other as we postulate our sort of big picture analysis of kind of where we are currently. I'm joined by my colleague, Kevin Howard. My name is Patrick Lovell. I'm a producer of The Con at www.thecon.tv. Kevin and I have joined forces to try to create a revolutionary movement to basically do something nobody sees coming. We're trying to erect a revolution of we the people in the spirit, I would imagine, at least for myself, of the original sort of framing of defeating tyranny to create a government of by and for the people. Which, if you've paid attention to my truth bombs, or if you haven't, you can find them at Patrick Level Truth Bombs, the con, or if you check out my work at www.thecon.tv, you'll understand that what I've been able to reveal through my work is the nature of the realities of the realities of our power structure and who's in control, why, and for what reason. And the big aha, based on where I was coming from before I launched into this, was that I had to re-engineer my mind. I had to reconfigure my understanding of what developed and evolved over the course of 40 years. I was long into my adulthood. I had already graduated from college. I had been, working in a variety of high level ways to ultimately get to a point where I realized everything that I had learned was pretty much just the opposite of what I was in the midst of. And it does bring us to a central question of which Kevin had proposed that we discuss. And I agreed, and I thought we should record this because I think it's a conversation that many people are having, and it's one primarily fixated on whether. Well, I don't want to. I don't want to frame it that way. It's just simply about capitalism. What are we? Are we a capitalist country? Is that the function of our economy? What does that mean in context to all of the other isms that we'll discuss as well? And I've got my position on it, and Kevin has his position on it. And so, it's probably in our best interest to understand each other's come froms, to fully understand what we can do with this movement that really is off of the information that we've revealed in the con that nobody else ever has, which just reveals that we live in a criminal state. Many people understand that we're corrupt. Many people like to use that as kind of a knee jerk, like everybody knows we're corrupt. The banks are corrupt. But nobody knows what the details are. Nobody understands anything. And so what we end up with is a potpourri of this mishigas, this meatloaf, if you will, of just mass confusion, primarily based on deception. And therein lies the big trick of what I think we're going to be able to unravel from both of our come froms and hopefully learn from each other. And hopefully you'll learn as well. We look forward to your thoughts in the comment section below. But on that note, I'll just pose the question to you and then we can kind of lead each other through this. Are we a capitalist country, Kevin? And what is the definition of capitalism?
Well, thank you for inviting me to have this conversation, Patrick. I really appreciate, um, just being here. I think more of these conversations need to be happening across the country. So let's begin. Um, so you asked two questions. Are we a capitalist country, and what is capitalism? I want to say before we get into the technical definitions, because they are fairly straightforward, that that like with anything, any human endeavor, nothing stays the same. Everything, just like each one of us are in a constant state of change, so is the systems that we run. So is the things that we do. And so I would like to use as a frame, as a point of reference, to consider the RPMs on your car. Okay. The relevance of the RPMs in the car and why it's there for the driver is because it's giving you an indication as to um, as the driver, as the car is actually functioning, right? It's telling you as long as the RPMs are within this range, the black range, right? The car is going to function the way it's intended to function, right? But as soon as you get into the red, you're starting, now you're exceeding the range where the car is going to function the way you expect it. Okay. So when I answer the question as to what is capitalism and whether we have capitalism, I would like you to consider within the context of the RPMs, right? Because because we can define capitalism, a system of economics that endeavors to deploy capital on the basis of self-interest, and it's privately held capital, right? And so it's a system of economics that's fueled by self-interest to the extent to which I can use my innovation, my effort, my talents to create value that people will pay money for, and that I can do so over and above the cost of that production. I can benefit from it. This is the system of capitalism, and that the items that I would accumulate and the resources that I would use to accumulate are held privately as opposed to publicly, or centrally. So we can get into a definition of that, and I know we'll go back and forth for a moment just to make sure we're speaking exactly about the same term, right? And then we can answer the question as to whether we have, whether we are a capitalist system now. In my view, this a version of that generic definition was the intent, in terms of at the formation of our country. You know, I think it was the intent that we would have. It's a free market capitalist system, and a lot of the principles are inherent in our Constitution. In terms of the Commerce Clause and other provisions, right, which suggests that was a part of the intent. Whether we have one now, to me, what we have now is a version of capitalism that is not functioning the way it was designed to function. We have a global economic system that is buried deep in the red of the RPMs. And so consequently, and it is absolutely not functioning, the way if you drew up capitalism in its ideal form, it would function. But that's been done on purpose, and that's been done, and how that's been done is the same thing that drives capitalism in the first place. Our capitalism has been run off the rails because people are advancing their self-interest. And the human tendency is yes, when you don't have much, you're very open to competition. Okay, so I don't have much, but I can get much if I can be smart, if I can work hard, if I can be innovative, then I can compete, then I can start accumulating. And okay, so on that side of the ledger, the very low part of the RPMs, you're golden. The problem what happens is now that you're wealthy, now that you have accumulated real capital. Okay, do you still want to compete? Do you still want to be hungry? Do you still want to, or is it the tendency to say, you know what, it's actually easier to close the door behind me than continuing to innovate, continuing to add value, continuing to come up with the next best idea that no one else has, right? That's the harder path. The easier path is to say, how can I rig the system so that other smart people won't be able to compete against me, right? And so, unfortunately, that's where we are, where the fuel of capitalism, self-interest, has driven people to the point where they now invest their resource in making sure that no one competes, making sure that they or their allies are able to accumulate at the expense of everyone else. They've actually taken Adam Smith's central tenet, the notion that microeconomic self-interest has macroeconomic benefits because it inspires greater productivity because the individuals benefit from the fruits of their labor, right? Yeah, that's true. As long as the self-interest is not so toxic that it exceeds the additional productivity that it produces. This is where we are now. For most of the American experiment, the greed, the cost of the greed did not exceed the additional productivity. And as a country, we have grown and we have grown and we have grown and innovated. But now the way capitalists function is that that the toxicity, the cost of their self-interest actually destroys, has such devastating impact on the macroeconomic productivity. Well, look what happens to GDP. GDP, real GDP, is progressively flattening over the last 40 years, right? Because so much of our creative spirit is over in financialization, Wall Street, as opposed to innovating in technology, in manufacturing, in creating new products. You can make more money. We create more billionaires with financial engineering than we do with innovation and productivity. And so therefore overall productivity is declining. Is the rate of growth is declining in productivity. This is where we are. So to answer your other question was the harder question. Do we have capitalism today? We have the death throes of capitalism that has been run off the rails, deep into the RPMs. And now it's not functioning in any measure, by any measure that anyone would expect a capitalist society to function. And I'll stop there.
Well, it's a very rational, reasoned, and seasoned narrative, but it didn't answer the question. But yet, it kind of answered the question because you went to a robust understanding of your interpretation of the ideal of capitalism, which definitely created the ripples in the right direction. And yeah, I agree with you on everything except for your definition, because capitalism is just a definition. That's all. I'm just going to read you the Webster's Merriam definition, and we all should know it, but we should all put it everywhere. And I'm going to go through all of them just real quick because I think I want to touch down upon all of these in response to your thinking on this. But capitalism, the definition is, it's an economic and a political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit. Now, interesting. It includes in the definition, and a lot of people don't think of it this way, but it says it right there in Webster's, that it's an economic and political system. That's interesting, right? Because we think of it as an economic system versus an ideological system or a political system, but that's the definition. So let's contrast that just by way of definition with socialism. Socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned and regulated by the community as a whole. Okay, so it's the community that's in charge of the production and the distribution and everything that comes from that economic engine. But it is also a political and an economic theory. Now, let's contrast that with communism. Communism is a political theory derived from Marx, advocating class war and leading to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. And then ultimately, fascism is defined as a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and a movement characterized by dictatorial leaders, centralized autocracy, and militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, and belief in a natural social hierarchy and subordination of the individual interest for the perceived power. And then lastly, one that a lot of people don't equate, but they ultimately get to, and you did in your answer, corporatism, which is the control of state or organization by large interest groups. Interesting that it doesn't mean business groups, it said interest groups. Now, those are the absolute definitions. So let's kind of piecemeal it together in terms of where I'm coming from.
Can I respond for a second, though, Patrick? Yes, I appreciate you reading the definitions. As it relates to capitalism, my definition was in alignment with that definition.
Self-interest.
They're defining it they're characterizing it in a macro sense, in terms of the ownership of businesses, of examples of capital. You know, I was speaking of from the perspective of individual actors, right? And how I defined it, but it's essentially the same system. You were talking private ownership, we're talking driven by self-interest, you know, and whether that capital is deployed in the form of businesses, innovation, technology, products and services, all types of things. Absolutely. But that's the system. It's there's private ownership versus those other systems are
What's missing from
dysfunctional.
the definition, do you think?
What's missing from the definition?
Okay, let me offer this. Let me offer this because you had about 10 minutes there, I think. I don't know how long we've been doing it,
Oh,
but
no,
I'm
that's fine.
going to go
Please.
on for a few minutes here.
Of course.
Because what I argue is that we're not a capitalist country. Capital is simply fuel. Capital is fire. Capital is the means through which certain functions happen. Capital can heat a house. Capital can destroy a house. It depends on who's in charge and for what reason and what the outcome is. And therein lies reality. So, my shortcut to everything has been since I've discovered the realities of fraud on a monumental level, which is actually racketeering, that no, we are not a capitalist country, nor are we, in my real world understanding of everything that we put together with our work, nor are we a democracy. And we haven't been for some time. I don't know if we've ever really been a democracy, but I think that we had different moments, particularly after World War II, where both as an economic engine through the returning GIs and the growth in industrialization, not to mention the fact that we were the last country standing, that we actually did have a rising tide raises all ships, minus, sorry, the minorities of this country, but primarily for the white working class. Although there were major gains in comparison, obviously, if we think about it across the board for literally everyone, but nothing like, the American middle class who got a chance to be able to own a home, put their kids through college, have the white picket fence, the two cars, all that sort of thing, to be able to achieve a level in life that was worth trying to achieve, right? The sort of spectrum, your work versus the measure of what your value is, and ultimately how that system accomplishes that. But what I discovered and what I've been trying to scream to the world, from the mountaintops for some time, is that no, we're not a democracy, nor do we function as a capitalistic economy, although capital is, of course, the engine of everything. And you said correctly, it's financialization. Now that's a different sort of mechanism than industrial capitalism. That's not neoclassical capitalism, as we both know. So, or excuse neoclassical capitalism, yeah. So, the nature of what we're looking at the moment, and hence why we're creating the Clean New Deal, is that we are a corporate fascist state. So, what do I mean by corporate? It's redundant, but when you saw the two definitions of both corporatism and fascism, the only difference is far right leaning ultranationalism, but all the rest of the ingredients are the same: subjugation, meritocracy, I can't think of the right adjective, but it's just suppression of wages, exploitation, managing everything up to the C-suite level, and of course, the investors, but they do that through autocracy, right? So we've known that for some time, but I say that it's a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate. Now that's the key consideration here, because what it doesn't say, and what's missing from the definition of capitalism, and that what we've been kind of, I don't know, maybe bred, propagandized to believe, but we were always sort of the nature, particularly of capitalism in the Cold War era, was maybe the notion of what you could call selfishness, and what would ultimately have a huge impact on me, particularly as a filmmaker, back in the 80s, when, of course, Oliver Stone presented Gordon Gekko, when we learned that greed is good. That was the bottom line. That's what the 80s were all about, right? Get rid of the hierarchical structure, the divisions of companies that weren't profitable. You could streamline, you could really create much more efficiency, which is, of course, the nature of financialization. And you could create higher and higher profits for the investor class, for those that are actually in the game. Now, all of that together in a continuum is capitalism, because it's all about capital. It's all about money going to specific aspects of whatever is running that particular industry. And we could maybe, because we're going to get to the president of the UAW in this conversation, let's use the auto industry as an example. We all know that there's raw materials and assembly lines and technology and everything that goes into the manufacturing of a product that then maintains an ecosystem of everybody that works for that corporation, which then enables them, to live the way that they live within, I guess, the hierarchy of whatever their income level may be. Now, the idea is that, okay, you're an innovator in the market. Let's say initially you're Henry Ford. Was Henry Ford, outside of his anti-Semitism and all of the other ideological defects, he was probably best known for being a genius at the automation system of the assembly line, right? He wasn't necessarily a terrific car engineer or creative visionary, but it was the assembly line and the efficiency and everything else. And also, to his credit, minus all of his faults, was to price a vehicle in the market that most people could afford. Now, ultimately, that was concurrent to what people were making. That was actually prior to the notion of financialization, because, yeah, there was loans involved, but it wasn't to the level of what we've seen over the course of the last 50 years, but particularly the last 25 years. But the point being that if we're going to use that as a standalone, that the innovation meets capital to create realities of new technologies and also growth models to ultimately create the consumer class. All of that is capitalism. Now, tell me what happens the second that we find out that simultaneously they were making sure that the brakes were going to go out with 25,000 miles, that the engine was going to explode, and that the people purchasing those cars were going to die by purchasing those cars. What would happen in a capitalistic arena, given the nature of what I've just laid out in terms of the fundamentals?
Well, this is why I use and I think it's an important point, why I use the analogy of the RPM, because it is an inherent component of the human application of capitalism that we wind up where we are.
Okay, I understood. But just answer the question real quick, because I really want to pinpoint this before we move into more ideological segues. Okay. What would happen in a capitalistic market if the brakes were wired to fail at 25,000 miles, and let's just say 50% of the consumers died as a result of sabotage? What would happen?
People wouldn't buy it. People wouldn't buy that product.
Exactly. They would not buy that product.
That's right.
So based on what we know, just a very simple question, based on what we know, is that our reality in 2024?
Oh, no, not at all.
Not at all. Okay, so let me move to the next thing, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so that's first and foremost. Okay, so it's an illusion. Okay, that model of reality, of common sense, and everybody that's sitting on the other side of the screen going, well, no fucking way would people buy a product that they know is going to blow up. Yeah, America, wake up, because you live in a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that not only gets away with this in ways that you cannot possibly, if you don't even know what we're talking about, because they've looted, they've stolen tens of trillions of dollars while destroying tens of millions of people. And yet everybody's out there going, oh yeah, we know it's corrupt, but I'm not going to do anything about it because I can at least make a little bit of money here and there in a vestibule of, like, maybe there is a little capitalism. Maybe I can go fucking, drive an Uber. Maybe I can call my own hours. Maybe I can go deliver some food for what is that, that online, like Instacart or whatever these things are across the board, where, yeah, you're supposed to keep care of your own taxes. You make your own hours, you make your own money. Oh yeah. Are you making enough money to live in? Have you seen the cost of, the apartments downtown, or you're going to buy a house right now? Good luck with that, right? If you don't have the income to do it. So that is just something I'm trying to relate to a lot of people. But at the same time, what I'm trying to get people to understand after the course of the last 13 to 15 years, that, yeah, you have a corporate fascist state. And by the way, there's a lot of shit that happens with the law firms in this whole mix, which also is a revolving door right into our government, which makes it that much more absolutely clear, particularly after Citizens United and some of these other processes through which billionaires and these operations can basically own the government to then write the laws that you don't understand through this corporate fascist state to create a secure, not a secure, a complete backstop using our Federal Reserve, the central bank of the United States, to backdoor tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the companies that blew everybody up. And yet, hold on, yet nobody's doing anything, right? What they're doing is a lot of them are like, you know what, this whole system's fucked up. Maybe I'm going to put on a red cap. Maybe I'm going to go with this guy who's telling me that, you know, he's going to buck the system, even though I know a lot of what he's done is this system and who he plays ball with. But you know what, we'll set that aside for another day because I'm going to come back to the ultimate point. Now it fuels this fascist tendency to be able to get all of the people that are on the downside of this to want to blame somebody, but because they don't know the engine, they start to blame every which way to Sunday, including not understanding that our economic system is being used against them in just the opposite way of what they think it's designed to do, i.e., that you're a bootstraps kind of person, that you can make your way through the system, that if you're smart enough and you're hardworking enough and everything else, you're going to get your piece. My friends, that ship sailed long ago, okay? We are completely owned by a criminal apparatus that uses illegal behavior that is by millions of different remedies in the system that is illegal, which means it's criminal, which means that if you had a functioning government for and of by the people that actually had the integrity of law, that two things would happen. Or even if you had a populace that was informed, right? Because if the populace knew that the brakes were going to go out, they weren't going to buy that car. So that company goes bankrupt. It goes out of business, bye. You're not a part of the situation anymore. That's the presumed, full cycle of the ideal of capitalism. Capitalism is supposed to be risk reward. You provide opportunities for investors looking for people to make the greatest products using the best ingenuity, best business practices, best distribution across the board. That's the way it was when we were younger. That was the idea conceptually. That's who the winners were in society. But we've turned it all upside down because we created a global paradigm. We created, you can manufacture X amount of work using cheap labor and no regulations for environment over in this part of the world. And then you could have guys move the product through financialization, a whole sequence of other things to create this illusion of a consumer society. Meanwhile, they've pressed lower and lower and lower on wages, on people's ability to make income by simultaneously creating all sorts of fraud in the marketplace that we show you in the con and we could show you across the board. And this isn't meant to be a full-scale PhD dissertation other than to get people to understand that we really need to be careful about terms. We need to be careful about what it is that we are trying to profess because socialism does work. We've seen it, and this country has plenty of socialism, right? We are a hybrid country, really. We have the military, we have police, we have firemen, we have public educators, we have this, we have that. We have all sorts of forms of socialism, right? And we also have, by the way, co-ops. Now, co-ops is a form of a collective to where maybe not as innovative as I've seen in other countries, but certainly in certain parts of technology it exists, and then agriculture and so forth. And I think it's growing in certain places, but we are a huge economy. And we have a lot of people doing a lot of different things. But for the most part, the idea that A, we have a democracy, and B, we have capitalism are both non-existent for one reason and one reason only. The law subjugates down, pushes down, while extracting the wealth upward through fraud, which means that everything is a facade. And all what I'm doing and what we are doing together is two things: to illuminate reality so that hopefully an informed populace can go, oh man, I knew I was getting played. And now I know how I'm getting played. So I want to join Kevin and Patrick on this populist tidal wave crusade to purge corruption and drown the fascism it fuels, to redeem, in my opinion, the American dream. Because the American dream is much more than the idea of capitalism. It's equality, it's harmony, it's a system that works, it's empathy, it's ability for people to live a life of dignity and decency and not have to be completely decimated to where your family is constantly in anxiety trying to work 3 jobs apiece to try to keep it together, or you're in some fractured mode of having lost everything and trying to piece your life back together. So coming back to the idea of capitalism to finish my thought. Capitalism is simply capital that was revolutionary, that broke the bondage and the grips of aristocracy, only to ultimately replace it with its own version of an aristocracy many, many decades later. So centuries later. So it was a revolutionary force that perverted itself because we, the people, have not been given the information to understand how absolute power corrupts absolutely, even though every one of us have known that since the beginning of our lives, probably, right? In one form or another. So anyway, I think I'll leave it there to start. But I just argue that it's not capitalism, man, and it's in capital itself is just the means through which people get paid, and it depends on what the management is and who the directors are that determines the outcome of how that process works.
That was that was a great discussion, a great expression of where we are, Patrick. What I don't know if it's a counter, what I'm suggesting to you here is that the way capitalism functions, as long as people are engaged in capitalism as a system of economics, I reject the notion of its political, characterization.
That was interesting, the definition, wasn't it? That it says it's political.
Yeah, yeah. So as a system of economics, the way it actually functions, what history has taught us since we have deployed it in the American experiment, is in the absence of rather prudent regulation,
Yeah.
guardrails, right? This is what capitalism does.
Yes.
It
True.
it replaces one
Absolutely.
aristocracy with another aristocracy.
Monopoly
But within
oligarchies.
different types of oligarchy, right? Within reasonable regulation, guardrails, what makes capitalism better than predecessor economics is it expands the access to wealth by creating a meritocracy, your own
True.
innovation, hard work, this and that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it wasn't just divine birth or some such thing, right?
Right.
And that was an improvement, no question about it. But the system of economics, what we have learned over the last 300 years virtually, is that one, if you don't have those guardrails, it the Gilded Age, the Roaring '20s, we have it again in a modern context.
Yep.
People
Robber
who-
barons
yes, the people who gain wealth close the door behind them.
and
In other words,
Confederacy.
because the core tenet is I'm advancing my self-interest. Self-interest
Yes.
is a core virtue of capitalism.
Yes.
But the and by the
Humans
way,
humans are evil who
no,
pursue power.
all
Typically.
I would say is okay, so because that's not a necessary component of human nature, by the way. That's a different
True.
different conversation. But it is a necessary component of capitalism. And so if now that
True.
you are wealthy, in order to advance your self-interest, history has taught us that there becomes a balance in preferences between competing honestly that
True.
allowed you to accumulate your wealth and competing dishonestly because it's easier to do so. You have the
Absolutely.
influence,
And
right?
it's easier to get people to be complicit in that system, which goes to the actual the fundamentals of evil, quite frankly, the way I define evil. But to your point though, I gotta ask you this question as you continue to roll on though. but I asked you the paradigmatic revelation. So risk reward, accountability slash the marketplace. Okay. If everybody knows that those fucking brakes were clipped and everybody gets on the same page, does everybody continue to buy and purchase that product? You already established no. It's an
Yeah,
elementary
no,
question.
no,
But
absolutely.
but that's exactly what we continue to do over and over and over. And as stupid as it sounds, America, you can interpret that any way you want to, America. It's that simple. Please go.
Yeah, but see, this is where operating in the red comes from. No one is functioning the way they would normally function because we live in a pulp fiction. Everything is at the extreme, right? So you have a media totally controlled and owned by the wealthy elites who spin a narrative
And who will
that
not let Patrick Lovell tell the fucking truth of the
that's
story that
true.
they
That
washed
but
me.
we
So hold on one second in terms of free market America. Look, what I say, one of my other my what are my other things here? And I gotta pitch this to the people if they're paying attention, because people wake up. The only thing the American people buy are lies. We gave you the fucking $30 trillion truth for free. That gives you the blueprint of how this whole thing works. Don't hesitate after this. Go to www.thecon.tv, because that should be the linchpin and the blueprint to make you go, oh, now I get it. Because it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. Now, I will not interrupt you again. I apologize.
well, but this is the thing. This is what people have been fed. How do you make friends and influence people? The whole center of marketing, right, is manipulation and lies. We're not selling each other products because they're going to serve us and do us better. We're selling each other products because we relate those products to the things we hold dearest. This is why you have the hot looking girl standing in front of the car. I want to hang with the hot looking girl, so I gotta buy that car. That's manipulation. That is this is
Well,
so I
sure.
don't blame the American public. I am been victim of that myself, of the fact that wealthy people have invested a lot of money to create mythology that convinces us that KFC is good. KFC, you see the family coming there, you're working hard, long day and stuff like that. You ain't got time to cook. You're going to go to the drive through and get something that's going to kill your family if you keep on eating it, right?
Yeah, sure.
But it's tasty. It tastes good.
Yeah.
So to your analogy of the car that's not going to work, that the brakes are going to go out, you have a lot of money being invested to say that's a hell of a car. Don't worry, you're going to trade it in before the brakes go out and stuff like that. And then you don't get to trade it in, and then the brakes went out. Right? So I'm not blaming the American
Right. They
public
can
because they
spend
keep
it.
on.
Yeah, there's no question.
Yeah, okay. So what I'm trying to say to you, because this whole conversation was about about capitalism and whether, yes, we have to get the guardrails back. We have to clean out the corruption. This is
I
not
think
the first
capitalism
time.
doesn't exist right now. It's
No,
financialization or
and I
perverted
submit to you,
techno feudalism, or just a modern day feudalism, but or modern. But
Patrick,
Robert Barron, go ahead.
Patrick, it does exist. This is exactly, that's what I'm saying.
You got to
You know
change the
what?
definition. There's no
No,
risk
no,
reward.
no, 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 no.
There's no risk reward, dude. Come on, man. There's no risk
No,
reward. Capitalism requires risk reward.
hear what I'm saying. What I'm saying to you is the car is still a car when you run it into the red of the RPMs and it starts not functioning like a car. It's still a car, right? The problem is that in capitalism we still have private ownership, right? We still have self-interest. The
Well, yeah.
problem is that you've taken it to the extreme, and what it looks like in the extreme is not the way you would think of capitalism. So that's why I'm saying
Well, that's true. Yes,
okay.
absolutely.
And so if
I'm
we
saying the
can
same thing.
if yes, we are saying the same thing, but the difference between how it viewing it as a continuum of something run off into the extreme or something totally different is you lose the lesson of what happens when you bring it back into the
Okay,
guardrails.
fine. I'll accept that, but I'm going to throw this
Okay,
right back
so
at you.
so
Because see, this is what, like, and I see this all over the place, and I do have a major issue with it, right? Because as I've said at the beginning, we have a hybrid economy. Okay, there's elements of socialism, there's elements of co-ops, there's
sure,
elements of capitalism, there's elements of however you want to disseminate the idea of self-interest, right?
Those are the guardrails.
Some of
Those,
the people
those
I
are the
pay, some of the
regulations.
people I pay most, well, first of all, I would argue that no matter what the industry is, if somebody fails because of looting or because of the grand setup in a racketeering enterprise, and the law is used based on, it's not rocket science, it's racketeering, but ultimately we have laws and laws and more laws and more laws and laws and laws that basically say, no, you do this, this is a felony. What degree is it? Okay, well, it could be X amount of felonies, that if you do this and it's proved in a court of law with the actual evidence that is so easy to get. That's the thing. It's so easy to get the evidence. And yet, as we've discovered, particularly as it relates to Donald Trump, yeah, you can look at the January 6th insurrection, and then Tucker Carlson's going to pull out a whole bunch of footage that was provided to him by Kevin McCarthy. That's like, hey, take a look at all these peaceful guys that were just here for well, we saw everything else, and we know how many people got killed and blah blah blah. You can manipulate anything, right? Especially as a producer and as an attorney, right? But the facts are the facts. And if you're in a court of law and you have a judge who's calling balls and strikes because the judge is premised on great intellect, he's gotten to a position because, of course, we believe in the meritocracy. He deserves to be there, although a lot of people were voting, and there's another aspect of it. But the system itself is that the judges are there to call balls and strikes based on the evidence and the laws, and have enough common sense to know when they're getting played, that's when certain things can go into evidence and so forth. We've seen this whole thing in Donald Trump's civil fraud trial, for example, right? But at the same time, then you get the media that has no idea what's going on, giving you misinformation. The attorney is giving you misinformation, and you as a citizen who doesn't have all of the higher level of education so that you understand when you're getting played, you need someone who understands that to interpret it for you, to provide you the information, which is what our media is supposed to be. But unfortunately, as you premised earlier, media is owned by the billionaire class. It's owned by the investment class. It's owned by the financial class. It depends on the advertising revenue and all of the mechanisms of how this whole thing functions. And they listen to who's paying them. What did Upton Sinclair say? He said the greatest way for you to get somebody to not see something is to make sure that his paycheck is dependent on him not seeing it. That's our entire society. So as we continue to discuss this, though, because we've got to get to this ideal of what is the option forward. So in the Clean New Deal, for example, I propose, and you agreed, and you proposed, and we've worked on this together with our other colleagues, especially as we're reaching out to folks like Shawn Fain, who I'm getting more and more interested in every single day because of the information you've been sending me, and his basics, his view of the world is spot on, right? He understands what it means in order to form a more perfect union through the lens of the fairness of somebody's actual profession. And he's fighting for these things on behalf of United Auto Workers Association to adapt and to be innovative and to be forward, which we both understand is what the American working class has to achieve to be able to reboot. What I'm saying is redeeming the American dream, predicated on all of our social justice values and things that we've discussed about the Reverend Martin Luther King at the time of the civil rights movement and so forth. But going back to Shawn Fain and capitalism and everything else, my goal is to make sure that people stop buying what we're being lied to buy, which is simply that you're a democracy and that you're a capitalist country. No, you are owned and operated by an oligarchy that's a criminal class that operates like they're the aristocracy because they're above the law. And oh, by the way, what is that called? Tyranny. What gave birth to the United States, given all of our faults? Tyranny. Do you not know what it means to be an American? So quit buying the bag of goods that this system is selling us. Get yourself inside the truth to wise up, to get you in a position of power, because knowledge is power. Knowledge has always been power, and you can't expect somebody else to rise to the level to save you when they're all getting paid to bury you. So on that last, and I'm talking about the politicians and the media and the justices and everybody who have completely betrayed the United States, right? But it's this notion of capitalism that started this conversation because, yes, the ownership class for self-interest who has its own, mechanisms, but only private ownership where they could get more and more and more assets, And then the people who are the ownership class get smaller and smaller and smaller, and then ultimately manifest this notion of what, back in the 80s, they were talking about greed is good for the shareholder value. Why did they say that back in the 80s? Because they want all of us to be able to share in the upside. And that's why we invest our capital from our careers through our pensions and everything else through this whole economic engine and this paradigm, because we want a piece for ourselves so that we could maybe go on a better vacation, so that maybe we could get that great dress for our wife, or whatever the case is, right? But all of that stuff, as close as it was to a myth in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, is now out the door, pants on fire lies at a mammoth. Tens of millions of people have been subjugated by a system that there's no way to pinprick this way. Now, let me just finish up this idea of capitalism in terms of self-interest, right? And this is where, because I'm an athlete and I would love sports. Okay, so I always think of it as in the terms of the next LeBron James, the next Michael Jordan. Now we know that there's not going to be a lot of Michael Jordans and LeBron James, hence why there's a Michael Jordan and LeBron James, right? But if you become one of those guys, you become an economic engine to yourself. Okay, now minus Michael Jordan having all of his clothes and Nikes and everything that generates his name brand recognition and the billions of dollars of upside for him that he pissed away at the gambling table, which is a little bit of a flawed problem with a guy like Michael Jordan. But the bottom line is, yeah, they did, produce all of those retail Jordan brands, and utilizing what Thailand and a lot of the Far East companies, where the companies like Nike had little to no regulation, where they exploited the worker, which was basically slave labor, so that they could make cheap products to get them in the United States, so that dudes trying to get a piece could sell these goddamn Jordans for like $350 on the street, right? I mean, it's like, that's a freaking insane version of the economy, right? Maybe these guys think I'm going to get mine and I'm going to get a piece and I'm going to hustle, which is another part of capitalism that's pretty amazing, when you get the entrepreneurs who are constantly working to make shit happen, right? But at the same time, what they are is being under the thumb of a manipulated system that's serving the machine at the top, that is above the law, that has completely destroyed the entire ecosystem of what the whole thing is meant to try to achieve. So in the end, again, my definition of capitalism is that it's non-existent, because it's just simple. There is no risk for those at the top. They have complete control.
They've destroyed the system. Patrick, I hear you, but take note that we've been here before. Not as bad as the current condition. This is worse than before. But similarly, the last time we were here, and our economy needed a reset. The precursor to the reset is the Pecora hearings.
Right.
Right. So
Absolutely.
we had the stock market crash in 29. We had the Great Depression, and in the early in the early term of FDR's first term as president, starting in 1932, we had this investigation of what went wrong, and we had this cleansing of the fraud. And part of what we are recommending in the Clean New Deal is to have the similar accounting for how we got here, how things got so rotten.
Which comes from?
Which comes from you tell me. I'm sorry. Oh, the con. No, the evidence of the con. Yes.
The con, because let me just remind you, the United States had Ferdinand Pecora. Adolf Hitler's Germany didn't, and neither did Stalin's Russia. Okay, so that's a big difference, right? Go ahead.
But what I'm trying to point out here is to take note that we're back here again.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The regulation, once the Pecora hearings were complete, we understood who did what, and we held people accountable. And then massive
came up with solutions.
You came up with solutions. Guardrails were put up again.
And the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Absolutely. Meaningful guardrails were put up again. The country, the FDR administration put the country to work, do a number of very important national projects and stuff like that. And it built, post World War II, it built the Pax Americana, the best economy the United States has ever had from 1950 to 1980. There's no doubt about it. We're back here again.
Right, but
What I'm
let's
trying to,
finish that concept though, because you still have a little bit more to fill in, I think, because
well,
two things that is a misnomer, right? FDR said that I saved capitalism from itself. What he did was, and he said he wasn't bought out by his own class. Okay, both of those are kind of true, not exactly true, but the point that I'm trying to get you to kind of continue though, along those lines, is that it was Keynesian economics that enabled the United States to become the superpower, right? But predicated on what? What was it predicated on?
well, see, Patrick, and I hate, okay, I'm gonna restore, I want to go back to what I'm saying. I understand what you're saying, right? And that, I answer that question, we're gonna go down a path.
Okay,
All I'm trying to say here
fine, I
is
understand.
that
That's good.
is that we have a pattern here. We had the Gilded Age of
Yep.
the 1800s that led to depressions across the 1890s. We had the Roaring 20s that led to the depression across the 1930s, right? We had the Pax Americana after the Pecora hearings in 33 that led to the peak of wealth and income equality in American history, notwithstanding the civil, the difference between the races and all this other stuff, right? And we find ourselves back here again, right? What I'm trying to say to you here is that rebuilding the guardrails, holding the thieves and the con artists accountable and stuff like that, restoring capitalism to within the black of the RPMs where it works for most of us, right? Is not going to fix the fundamental problem. Because, no, let me finish. This is why we're here again. But here is the thing is, inherently what we've learned over 300 years is capitalism cannot be stable. In other words, you cannot have equilibrium, an economy that's working for everyone, and you just keep it there. The system is inherently uneven. It constantly it grows to the point where it collapses and grows to the point where it collapses. This is the nature and the history of capitalism. There is something systemically wrong with the model. Now, at the heart of that model is that it seems to work best when we grow. If we don't grow, it can't work. In other words, an economy that's not growing is contracting.
Sure. Give me an
Millions of people are
example.
losing.
Give me an example of what is the ideal in terms of what you've seen pulled off.
Well, I mean, again, the longest period of overall productivity growth in the United States, where we had very little recessions, very little depressions, was 1950 to 1980.
Yeah.
And when I'm and
So I
that's
was a
when we
working
had,
class.
that we had
No, I'd
real
argue with you
guardrail.
the most sustainable time period in North America were the North American Indians who didn't predicate their lives on greed. But
Yeah,
go ahead.
but my point being is we had very strong guardrails on speculation, on
Yes,
what you could do,
absolutely.
that
Not to mention
protected
stock
the
buybacks,
system.
which were illegal.
Oh, that totally protected the system. And what happened is that the American middle class exploded in
And
size,
90%
and
tax rate for those above. Yeah.
yes, and the American working class was the best it had ever been anywhere in the world, to the point where the working class could own a home and send their child to college.
Yep.
Okay, so that was the ideal, right? And that was under the very tightest reins. Okay, the best that we can hope for today is to reestablish that, to
I
rebuild the
totally agree with that.
guardrails,
But that's what I'm all
rebuild,
about.
yeah, rebuild the guardrails, hold the criminals accountable, you know, now we have our sovereignty back. The reason why that's not going to be good enough now is because the innovation that we have done over the last 50 years has us at a point where we are extracting more natural resource
Yeah.
than the planet can
True.
produce
True.
in a year. So by August 2nd of every year, we have extracted more natural resource than the planet is going to produce that whole year.
Can I
And
ask you a
as a result,
question?
yes,
So maybe the billionaires fucking knew that a long time ago and they destroyed it to destroy half the population.
oh, hey,
Is that
There's
possible?
there's an economist named Malthusian economics.
I
Check
wouldn't
it
put it
out.
past them, by the way.
In the 1790s, he predicted this problem of capitalism. The idea that it requires perpetual growth, and we are on a finite resource planet. There's only so much natural resource. The planet replenishes the natural resource, but it only replenishes it at a certain rate. We
Amen.
have we have innovated to the point where we're exceeding the carrying capacity of the planet. Right.
Absolutely.
And what that is doing is robbing future generations of the capacity to generate natural resource. So Malthus predicted in the 1790s that what would happen is you would have a mass reduction in the human population caused by the fact that resource depletion would not be able to sustain the magnitude of the human
That's right.
population
That's
that
right. But
grew.
we're talking about a global paradigm here. So let me
But
pivot here real quick.
no, no,
Let
but
me
let me
pivot real
but let
quick.
me
China, Russia, Brazil, India, and well, now Saudi Arabia. Okay, so where in that grouping is
yes.
sustainability, my friend?
No, hey, well, I can tell you this much. Let's just be very
Even though
pointed.
Saudi says 2050, whatever, man.
Yeah, okay. If you look globally at what countries are producing the most renewable energy, right? Number one in the world is China.
Sure.
Number two of the world is India. We're the
Really?
wealthiest. Yes.
What
Number
are they
two in the world is
producing?
in
What kind of it? No,
solar, wind.
really? Well, I mean, they're
Yes, renewable.
obviously they've got
Yeah.
over 1 billion people, so
No, but here's the thing. That's what I'm saying. Those are not we as wealthy as a country as America is. You'd be surprised, right? Only because they know we have to do this. They know we have to come off fossil fuels. The problem is that they don't have the resource. Even China does not have the resource to meet their energy needs by renewable energy
right,
alone.
right.
Right. So therefore, they're still producing carbon plants. Okay, I digress to answer your
And
question, but I want to
oil,
get
they're consuming Saudi like crazy.
oh, coal, oil, natural gas,
Yep.
this is why they're in Russia are best buddies now, because Russia has,
Absolutely, and
right,
that's what
okay,
I'm saying. That's what I was inferring by way of the BRICS. Go ahead.
okay, but all I'm saying here is that the problem with capitalism has run its course. It did a great job, but it fundamentally it requires growth in order to function well, and we cannot continue to just grow. We cannot continue to just use extra resources. This is not something that we can innovate our way out of.
Well,
The
and
unique,
the myth of the consumer class above all else is what I'm telling you is
well,
the
well,
financialization is the myth that people because people are using credit to continue to
well,
you know subsidize
because
themselves. Go ahead.
yes, because every economist and all political leaders and all capitalists have been feeding the American public. What do? We sent soldiers to war in Afghanistan for 10 years. And what did George Bush say to do? He told America to continue to
Consume.
shop.
Yep.
Yes, this is what I'm saying. But they're not wrong about capitalism. So the problem here is we need a new economics that allows us to take the natural resources that we actually have. We know how much natural resource we have, and we can continue to innovate how to use those natural resources. But we need to be able to live within the carrying capacity of the planet in order to sustain those resources forever.
Just so you know,
Like it,
I've been of that mindset since probably 1995. Okay,
okay,
so
but see,
hold on a second. Hold on a second. Hold on a second. It's 2024. All right, you got
yes,
Donald Trump and everything that he emboldens, right? We know it's not what you're talking about, but yet
oh
he's got
no,
what
well,
70
he's a
70
product,
million
he's a
plus people.
billionaire.
So we got to get some of those tens of millions to go, hey man, guys, again, all of this shit seems to me like it's the end of the line. Okay. What it feels like is we are the collective woman tied up on the track and that runaway train's coming towards us. And we got to have somebody, but what you're saying, okay, let me think about this. And I'm going to let you finish your point. But the thing that occurs to me, I thought we were going to have kind of a debate about capitalism and engine with it being regulated, with a informed populace that lives within their means, but we're dealing with character flaws is the whole problem of humanity, right? So, like, for example, I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with, the PhDs, or the JDs and whomever in places like Manhattan, and they always poo-poo this notion of globalism, right? It's like, look, there's no turning back. Globalism is real. That's the way it is. We're not going to question it. And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, well, this isn't Star Trek globalism. All this is oligarchies from around the world extracting everything to throw into a fictional pipeline of our financial system that continues this unregulated growth. Now, if that's what we're calling capitalism, I'm with you. That has to end. Because, like I'm saying though, and I'm arguing just, based on what we conceive is that, and I propose this to you again, if after 2008 every single freaking CEO on Wall Street gets sent away to prison, has all of his money extracted, and the government takes over the financial system to create the Pecora hearing, then to get new owners to come in. And then, are they going to want to break the law? If you have like, think about this. I've said this over and over and over. We've spent $70 trillion since 2013 through this system,
Yes.
basically printing digits out of thin air to backstop all this monstrosity of fraud in every single direction. And there's more, and yet nobody is stopping it. And it's like, you think about these guys, these people making $350,000 that are considered middle class in Manhattan, who are barely, having a life,
Yeah.
right? Because they got
Yeah.
to pay their 10,000 a month for their kids' private school, and they've got, real estate that, 2-bedroom apartment that's worth like 3 million bucks, and all this out of whack stuff, right? And they're like, well, shit, I'm not going to change this. You know what I mean? I want to change it, but I'm like stuck on the crack cocaine wheel that I got to keep this thing up, and I'm building, my equity. I'm building
Yeah.
my assets. I'm building this and that. Okay, so we throw those guys out, right? And like what Sean Fain said, we've got the numbers. If only tens of millions of people understood what's at stake here, and we're playing
And
roulette
would
with
stand
our
together.
lives. So what I'm
Yep.
trying to get you to tell me, because I had already said it at the outset, the hybrid system is that you got to have some socialism, you got to have regulation, you have to have cooperation and coordination within governments. But I'll be honest with you, the cynical side of me, like I've gone two different ways in my pathway, my pathology in my mind here, right? The first is, I know the only way that's probably going to happen, the cooperation amongst the world's governments, is after we have nuclear Armageddon, half the population dies and the winner takes all, and maybe somebody learned a lesson. Okay, that's first and foremost. The other one is you put everybody in prison that we already have the information on, to put them in prison in the United States first, because the American people are the last vestige on the planet that I'm aware of that does have still a degree of potential power if they utilized it, if they knew what was going on, if they weren't buying the lies of everything that we're subjugated, in our mainstream media and everything that's coming through, social media and all the grift. And, the people that have forever said, look, I don't have time for this. It's too complicated. I got to stick my head in the sand. Oh my God, somebody save me after I've like been, run through the freaking bulldozed into the ground, right? No, once you're on that island, I wrote a jingle one time, call it a rap, call it whatever. But I was like, when nothing means anything to you, you mean nothing. And don't cry to me when you're on your own private island, where you're about to drown and choke on your own plastic. Serves you right, man. I just like, I'm at a loss because it is 2024, right? Because the only way I see a pathway forward is yeah, you have to have a government that's on the same page, which means that you'd have to have a party that's extolling these virtues, that you could get there, like we've talked about initially, with somebody like Sean Fain who could run for president, that initiates what we need to do. But then what is the consumer mechanism? I'm not sorry. What is the economic engine to maintain what we have in the interim? See, the question is that if you were to, for example, say we need a global government that's going to regulate humanity to where, we're going to live within our balance of this wonderful planet that maybe God gave us. That's the only one that we know exists, even though a lot of people think there's probably billions of civilizations around the universe, and there probably is. Who knows? Bottom line is, there's not one within 10 light years of us, or more like a billion light years. I can't remember what the closest, but whatever. We're like this unique tiny blue marble. Like, what was his name back in the 70s, who was the great philosopher scientist, the tiny blue marble or whatever that was? I can't remember what his name was. But yeah, when are people going to start realizing that life matters, that it is an absolute gift, that you have to live within reason, that you have to live in a situation where we are each other's brothers' keepers, and yet nobody is going to do that because they continue to give power to those that are going to extract and basically throw everybody into servitude.
Well, Patrick, a couple of things really quick. First and foremost, we we are in this spot where we have to regain control and retake our sovereignty back as people. So we need the Clean New Deal that will hold, that will, we need to be united behind the idea that that we are not here by accident, that wealthy interests have taken control. And this is, and you have the evidence. All they need to do is go to www.thecon.tv to find out exactly how they have been doing it, right? But the fact is, so we need to hold them to account, and we need to reclaim our sovereignty, and we need to unite as a people and get someone such as a Sean Fain elected to be an independent president of the United States, someone
What
who's
we mean
from
by that
us.
is not beholden to anybody but the people. If we want to come
That's
to it by and
exactly
for the
right.
people, and we know that Fain has demonstrated that through.
Yes, he has. But here's what, but this conversation is about, okay, so once we have established, we're holding people accountable. We got the president elected, independent counsels are appointed. We're doing the procurer hearing style investigations of who rigged our system, the mass fraud and corruption that is poisoning our system. So that
That owns
train is going.
Congress, that owns the Supreme Court, that owns the administrative
Yes,
branch, and everybody
that
who's
that train
involved
is going.
from Clinton to Obama to blah blah blah.
Yes, that train is going. We are reinvesting. We're creating a new clean deal to reinvest and rebuild the American middle class. Okay, all that's going on. What is the economic system that we need to transition to fuel that? What I am saying to you here is the tenets at the heart of the capitalist model: self-interest. Okay, competition. To We use competition. Competition is a survival technique. Okay, but when we use competition to decide whether people can get health care, when we use competition to decide whether people can live in an area that doesn't have food deserts, they can actually get healthy food. We have made competition into a blood sport for our society. There's a reason why we kill each other more than anyone else, because that's how we treat each other. We're committing each other to be, the difference between whether you eat or die in the wealthiest country in the world is your wins and losses. We need an economics that aligns with actually how do we survive every day. Because what I'm saying here, I've already showed you historically what we've learned about capitalism, but I'm taken to task at the heart of capitalism is this notion of self-interest. Self-interest cannot be the basis by which we organize our new economics. And why? Because none of us survive by our actions alone. None, to advance my interests, I don't eat without people in the Midwest producing food, without people, harvesting crops, without truck drivers driving that food to my local community, without people in your entrepreneurs starting a business to house the food, to sell me the food, without someone creating a business or someone buying my goods and services so I can have money to buy the food. None of us survive independently. None of us survive alone. All of us survive on the basis of the contributions of many, many people, most of which we will never know. And the problem is that we are organized, our economics is organized to discount the hands that feed us, to discount the hands that serve us, and think of ourselves and our little networks, right? No, we have that. We don't survive by ourselves. And that is locally, that is nationally, that is globally. You can look every time we put sanctions against another major country, it has impacts on us. What happened when we sanctioned Russia? for the attack on
I'll answer
Ukraine.
that question, but
It's,
I want to ask you these questions up front, though. You said two key.
these are fundamentals, though.
Yeah, you
These are
said two
fundamental
keys. You said
principles.
two keys in your analysis there, which I thought was exactly right. You have entrepreneurs in the mix. Okay, so hold on a second. Let me finish this. So the first thing is that I want America to understand that we gave $70 trillion to people that basically looted and stole from us directly. Okay,
Okay.
so first and foremost, if we got cleaned up the corruption and we got the bad guys held accountable, hey man, if we live in a fair society and everybody knows what's up, we should budget at least $70 trillion on reconfiguring the economic paradigm, not the economic paradigm, the energy paradigm, which would be the Clean New Deal to get us off of fossil fuels, to get us. That's the only thing that can put together tens of millions of people in all of the ecosystems. And we have to get to public banking. Primarily, public banking is a key consideration here. That would replace, I think, the nature of the investment capital that has lost its, by the statutes, its ability to exist. Okay, because that's the problem, is that the guys that continue to steal, loot, and cheat are the guys that are in control, making the decisions for themselves. People need to understand that there are stealing. It's just that simple. It's not rocket science, it's racketeering. Final idea, and then I'm gonna give it back to you. America had an innovation gold standard in NASA that the world had never seen before. That technology, elicited the sort of foundational, exploratory human condition that we've had for many people throughout the centuries that led to us populating the world first and foremost. But the technology that came with it really gave us everything, quite frankly, from supercomputing to all technology to opportunity to seeing whether things grow in space. The innovation, the level of innovation was the very best. And I want to remind people that NASA was an arm of government. Now it's being privatized, right? We see Elon Musk in the midst of going to Mars for rich people to expand for what? It's almost like a fictional movie that I saw literally out of South Africa featuring Matt Damon when everybody was subjugated while the rich people were living in colonies in outer space, right? I mean, it's so Orwellian, it's incredible. So, but to your point about the economic engine and incentive, what I get really, really nervous about when I look at all the historical constructs, which you haven't touched upon, but I'm going to challenge you on right now. I understand everything from Lenin through Stalin. I I'm not a PhD, but I've got a working
Yeah.
knowledge of it.
Yeah.
I mean, the same could be said for, what was the guy who was the biggest influence well, he was part and parcel with Fidel Castro out of South America. Why can't I think of his name? He was always kind of like almost, why can't I think of his name? Anyway, look, yeah, we know what happened in the global South, right? We know about the extraction of human capital through the Cold War, right? And everything that was happening. But the question is, systems are all the same system when you have the power apparatchik, when you have the Politburo, when you have the Scandinavian countries don't operate that way, but they don't have the population that we do, and they have to rely on a lot of different types of resource, in innovation, and everything else. I love what Sweden's done. I love what Norway's done. But at the same time, I mean, Norway's one of the largest fossil fuel components. You know what I mean? People have got to live with what they're living with. So paint the picture of where we're at, in terms of knowing all of that background and knowing the worst of humankind and power.
Yeah. Well, this is what growth is. We're not talking about, we can't look to where we have been to tell us where we're going to go. We're going to where we have never been. And by the way, capitalism was that way versus mercantilism. I mean, I'm sorry.
True.
We're talking about the next stage of social evolution,
Yeah.
right? We're run the course on capitalism not because I say so or because we're running out of resource. We've exceeded the carrier capacity of the planet. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So what I'm saying to people
Absolutely.
is when you realize through practical experience that what you're doing is not working, what you're doing is not sustainable because it's destroying the source of production of the natural resource that you rely on, right? You have to try something else. But you also need to learn, well, what about what you were doing led you to that spot? This, and what it was is this notion of self interest, this notion of private ownership. We have to have a different relationship with resource than I own it. If I own it, then I can do anything what I want to with it. I could be Jay Leno and have 250 cars, and my cars are shined every day. No one is using them. Those car, the productive capacity of those cars are almost zero because they're just baubles. But that's actual resource that's being wasted, right? Okay, because but he has it on the shelf. We need to have a stewardship relationship with resource. Stewardship means I'm going to use the resource to the extent that I can put it to use that allows me to do all I can do, and but I'm going to use it in a way that preserves it for posterity. So I'm going to use it in a way that it could be there for my children and their children and their children. And oh, by the way, none of us would have resource if our ancestors used resource the way we do. We use resource as if it doesn't matter. Why? Because we own it, and that means that we can waste it. That means that we can, that's what I'm saying. The other thing is this notion of, again, self-interest. If you look at how you survive every day, and you survive based on what you and people who look like you and people who sound like you and people who think like you, if that's the only people you need to survive, then self-interest should serve you. But if you look at actually how you eat, the clothes you wear, the technology you use, the car that you drive, and they're produced by millions of people that you'll never know, then all of a sudden, maybe self-interest shouldn't be your guiding principle. Maybe if you're surviving based on the common productivity of humanity, that you should care about the common productivity of humanity. The idea is we care nothing for the very hands that support us every day and then wonder why we get cheap, terrible, awful service sometimes. Well, because they're worried about keeping the lights on. We need an economics that aligns with actually how we really live. How is it that we really live? Let me give you a clue. Nothing in nature lives independently. Nothing. You want independence? That's deep space. Nothing. We don't produce the air we breathe. We don't produce the water we drink, the food we eat, the clothes we wear. There's lots of people. Neither one of us on this call right here produced the language that we speak that helps us to understand the world. This was done by generations of humans. We have to get past this self-centered perspective of how we organize our society, right? We have to align how we organize our society with the way we actually live. And guess what? I would not live very long without millions of people who vote for Trump, without millions of people who look totally different than me, who have different faith, who have different sexual persuasion, who have who eat different food and stuff like that. We are a humanity, and our strength is that we have all these distinctive capabilities to specialize and produce unique skills and stuff like that. We need to be nourishing that. We need to understand that we need all of that. That is the strength. The reason why the dinosaurs didn't just eat us is because we specialized and cooperated. We didn't compete against each other. We supported each other in a symbiotic type of relationship.
What are you talking
So
about? The dinosaurs? We weren't around when the dinosaurs were around. What do you?
humanoids were around.
No, we weren't.
Yes,
No,
yes,
we weren't.
yeah. When prehistoric animals of great size and
Sure, they
predators of
existed,
great,
but the
yes.
dinosaurs were separated by 40 million years. Okay,
Okay, okay.
but like, okay,
All
but
I'm
that's
saying,
okay. That's okay.
the
Look, let me.
survival of the Homo
I
sapien,
agree. I agree.
right? It
You're
was
absolutely
was
right. It was cooperation. That's why I said the North American
yeah,
Indians
okay.
actually.
Yeah,
Let me just insert
well, okay.
this.
So let me just finish it up though, right? Because I know you want. All I'm saying here is that new system of economics, an economics of the 21st century, right? Is there are really brilliant people like Tim Jackson, the British ecological economist, who are looking into and Yanis Varoufakis, who are looking into an economics that allows us to learn the benefits that we gain from capitalism, but apply the technology that we have today, to apply our capabilities today so that we have an economics that can live within the resource capacity of the planet without us having to feel like we're going back to the 1800s. We're not talking about a Spartan life, but we waste resource today by this ownership model. Do you know, for all of us who have cars, I have a car, it's sitting in my garage. 98% of the time it's not used, right? I just need a car when I need a car. I don't need a car to sit there and not be used. What I'm saying is, if we better use our resource, we will all get far more out of our resource than what we're doing right now. Well, we have to start figuring that out. And we start figuring that out when we move away from this self-interest, private ownership perspective of our relationship with material, and start realizing that we don't get by on our actions alone. And we
Was
get,
this the subject of Onward at Last?
yes, yeah, oh, very much the subject. The point is to look at your own personal experience and ask yourself, if the narratives that you've been taught, the virtues that you've been given as Americans, right, are those virtues true, right? You know, if independence is all that, try it. Because we none of us live independently. If
Look,
freedom
okay, hold
expressed
on
it
a second.
free,
Everything you said, I agree with ideologically, and I want to use this as a methodology for people to understand. We don't all have to think exactly the same way to get to the Clean New Deal first, to be able to show everybody that, but it's not to discount what you're saying. Look, I think of you and what you're saying and what Giannis says, and Giannis says this clearly all the time, that, that Star Trek, right? There's a moment of Star Trek, and the way I'm looking at the world right now, to try to harmonize things, given what I've known since the 70s. I mean, in the evolution that I've seen, I mean, there was, the anti-war movement in the hippie culture and everything that I saw with the Grateful Dead and many others that for a long time went to the earth, found the ability to live within their means. They just wanted a lifestyle, a culture, call it a tribe, where they interacted and they lived free. And there was a sort of the collective, that, there was it was a tribe. Okay, it's a tribe. I mean, it's just organization and structure of you know of people getting along to help live and to move. And I agree with you that everything comes from everywhere and everybody else. But the problem is that we have fostered for many decades, longer than the natural outcome of a business cycle, through fraud, through the lies and the deception, that maintains the theft of the system that everybody's given up on, that everybody puts their head in the sand, and they're like, okay, somebody's going to save me. I can't do it. I can't pay attention. I've got to just survive. The culture that that was around in the, after the civil rights movement, and, like you pointed out to me in a previous conversation, it was the power at that time that, they were like, what do we got to do to make sure that this, middle class, this educated middle class, this upwardly mobile middle class, cannot challenge us for power. We've got to get them back on you know, the vertical of which, basically
debt
hold
peonage.
them in
That's right.
indentured servitude or bondage. I
Yeah.
mean, and so they have all the control, and they're going to continue to manifest what seeing throughout the last, I'm going to call it 15 years, but it seems like we're getting perilously close to another paradigm shift militaristically, between all of the different conflict zones and everything else. But to what end? It is not to change the paradigm for better for all of humanity by any stretch. And the millions of those people are not on the same page. We've had silos and more silos and more silos. As important as a movement as Black Lives Matter is, it's a standalone. As important as a Me Too movement is, it's a standalone.
Right.
Nor does it deal with the economic realities of massive, massive, massive carnage and looting and fraud from a tiny group of people that work with the attorneys, that work with the media, that work with the politicians to make sure you out there have no idea what's going on. And so my only, shall we say, criticism of the idea, and it's not a criticism, it's more of a realism. It's like, look, I could for sure see this evolving, right? Because but you'd have to have a critically thinking, educated population that understands harmony and balance and can do with it. And then you have a society that able, like I feel like that society exists somewhere in the universe. I'm sure it does. In
I,
fact, maybe they
Patrick,
visited us and trying to
I,
tell us. But go ahead.
I disagree. I look, it doesn't take every person listening to my voice can look at how they survive every day, and they will see what I'm talking about. Okay, if it just, I mean, it doesn't take an education to understand whether you made the food that you're putting in your mouth. You had a role to get it, but what did it take for it to actually get there? Everything from the innovation of the farming technique that produced the food product to the packaging that allowed it to get there, so that it was still something that you can eat, right? Oh, that's all I'm saying. Right. We need to look at actually how we survive every day, because in that in there's a wisdom in it, that the narrative that we're consumed with, right, doesn't accommodate, right? The idea that you need to think about life from your own perspective alone and then consider everything else, right, does not align with how we survive every day. And be right. And if you realize that the way you survive every day is because of the contributions of so many people you'll never know, their interests start to become important, right? Okay, what did we learn when we shut down the country because of COVID? The essential workers are some of the lowest earned people in the country,
They kept
and
the
they're
country
essential,
going. They kept the country going while
and they
they
get
were
the country.
exploited. While they were exploited, while other people stood on the couch and stole from
Yes,
PPP loans to throw
yes.
into fucking crypto. That's the
Yeah,
problem. You've
but
got. Listen,
don't
I'm
lose
with
that
you,
point.
dude. I'm
Patrick,
with
don't
you,
lose that.
bro.
Hold
But I'm telling
on.
you, there's more people
Yeah,
that my only criticism is that there's more selfishness and laziness and
that is
corruptibility than there is those that are
no, no,
willing to fight
no,
for
no.
harmony. There,
That's because
until
we.
millions show up, I
I'm
don't
just
know how
saying
you
to
can come
you.
up with
I'm
any
just
other
saying to you.
solution.
That's only because that is what we. That was what passes for normal in terms of how we survive, in terms of making our money, how we make our money. But I can tell you this much: everyone who's listening on this call, they have dinner with their family. They have dinner with their family. They participate in making dinner, right? And so you prepare dinner. And you might have 3 or 4 people in your family. So there they are sitting at the table. We usually, most of us, we're in America, can prepare enough food that there's plenty to eat. There's plenty to eat. And you put it on the table. Okay.
If you
People
can
take
afford
what
it.
what most we're in America. I'm talking about most of this country. And today, right? Okay, we
Yeah, but we
put
have a
food
lot
on the
of
table.
food insecurity too. You know it.
Yes, we do, but most people in America are not starving, and that's and for the person who is currently starving,
Most
no,
people in
I'm not
America
talking
are
to them.
obese.
But my point is that it's not just selfishness. We feed our families every day in the way that we should function as a broader society. We prepare more food than the family is actually going to eat there. That's where our leftovers come from, right? Okay, we put the food on the table. Everyone takes their fill and passes the plate, right? You want some more? You take some more. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, everyone then leaves the table. Everyone has been fed, and the leftovers are put away, right? We do that as a matter of course. Now, if everyone around that table acted the way we are encouraged to act in our global economy, right? What you would see is that the biggest, strongest, fastest, slickest people at the table would take as much of the food as they possibly could take,
That's right.
leaving some people with no food to eat,
That's right.
right? And now we're being told that that's normal. No,
Then they
we
would lecture
know.
everybody at the table that they didn't work hard enough. Meanwhile, they got given all of their
Yes, that's
abilities
what
for
I'm trying
free.
to say.
But that's
But,
but that's but see, but
but
that's not
we need to,
completely
but
reality either.
Patrick, we need to organize a society on the basis of what we already know to be true. Take what you need. Take what you need to live a fulfilling life, right? But what's the virtue We have made gluttony a virtue. What is the
True,
virtue of the billionaire class? Well,
true.
half the globe doesn't have enough to contribute. How many Elon Musks, right, are pushing a cart somewhere because they can't get education, right? What is the benefit to humanity to consolidate wealth in such small numbers and give those people so much that they can hardly ever use it?
None. I'm
And
not
the rest
arguing
of
with
us,
any of that,
okay,
especially because they
right,
stole it.
okay. Well, whether you steal it or not, what is the ethics of earning more than you could use? I mean, there's a reason why we are exceeding the
Well, the way
carrying
tax
capacity.
policy worked in the old days was you take 90% of the top 1% or the manufacturing, but you reinvest it in R&D so
But,
that you can have new movement,
Patrick, you missed my
new
point.
economy. No, I'm not missing it. I know
No,
exactly what you just said. Listen, man, I totally admire it. I don't know why you're confrontational with me because I admire it. I'm just saying it's unrealistic at the moment. And the reason I'm pushing
no,
back is
well,
because there's not been anything to prove otherwise. I was around the Occupy Wall Street movement. You know what I saw at Occupy Wall Street movement? I went to 23 different encampments. Okay. It eventually got, I would say, overrun by Marxist ideologues who decided that they want to reconfigure what's happening on the street with the homelessness that they were in the midst of because it was right in front of their face and that became a priority versus the economic engine that created the situation that they were in the midst of. That's what reality
okay,
is because people are reacting to their realities, right? And so,
right.
and so what I'm suggesting is that, like, again, partnership, sports, team. Yes, do I understand that there's no I in team, but you have great athletes that make your team slightly better? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Same with society, right? And everybody has to work together, but there are certain people that have more capacity for engineering or calculus or science or medicine or something than other people do. And if they
Right.
come up with the needs and the ideas of that particular society and we push them forward to create great breakthroughs that are betterment for humanity, that if you have the law in place and you have the right incentives in place and you have alignment and incentives in place, you don't have this mass dystopia that we're in the midst of. That's how I look at it. Because everything.
And that's true. So then what then has to change? My contention to you here is we don't have to make something up in whole cloth. We do not have to make something up. In other words, it is not working.
No, it's not.
We can fix where we are. But that just gets us back to 1935. Okay, so now we have the bumpers put back into place. We have the people in jail who got us in this spot and stuff like that. And we're starting, and the engine is starting to roll again. The problem is that the motivations that drive us off the rails haven't changed. The organization of our society on the basis of self-interest and private ownership. I'm not talking about socialism. I'm talking about the idea that if I own it, I can do anything I want with it. If I own it, and I'm allowed to own as much as possible, right? We are in a finite resource world. We can't all try to be as rich as we possibly can.
No,
We can't all.
you're very pragmatist there, okay? But this is where I go with the
No,
whole
but
notion. Hold on
the
a second.
thing
This is
about,
where I go with the notion of the survivability of the tribes. The North American tribes only lived off of what the land could provide for them, and they never took more than they needed because they knew that they had to sustain the generations, and this is what they learned through. But what did the white man do when the white man came and wiped everybody out and then slaughtered all the white buffalo, put all of the African Americans in into slavery, and then created robber baron situations with the notion, oh, wait a second, maybe some of you can become a robber baron. Okay. Again, this is all deception. This is all mechanics of the human ideal, where it's like, not the human ideal, the human reality. Okay. So look, I'm not saying any of your notions are wrong. Okay. Like, who am I to ever, I've been on this mindset forever. I believe that to the grossness of just the straight up billionaire class and their ownership class of our system is, to me, enough to want to purge it. Okay. But then you add on the complications, not the complications, the abomination of the fact that you've got people lying, stealing, and cheating through documentation fraud in all capacities of commoditization to ultimately create a facade through credit that people are living off of credit. basically stealing people's identities to continue moving. I mean, there's all sorts of realities of this stuff that are anchored to financialization that has destroyed the world. That's my first, uh, uh,
Of course, that's
objective,
the first
is to
order
overcome
of
that. And
business.
if we
Yes,
could do that, and if
yes.
we could show that 70 trillion, was stolen, and we put 70 trillion for the next 15 years into a reckoning of, moving forward. Do I think that we could create a renewable energy paradigm like that? I do. I mean,
No,
go
I
ahead.
agree, but okay, Patrick, do you agree with Albert Einstein's famous quote? And I'm going to read it: that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them.
Yeah, that's what he's saying is innovation.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
no, that's right. Okay, we are here because of self-interest. The billionaires they're advancing their own self-interest. Okay, the billionaires are competing with each one of us, and we're just losing. Right? Yeah, the billionaires are, who own the politicians, who own the judges, who own the media. Right? The people who are in the media, they're competing and they're getting paid to deceive us. So this is the virtues that define America
Yeah,
being used against us.
absolutely.
Okay, what I'm trying to say to you is at what point do we realize there's something wrong with those virtues, right? Okay, if that's if think of anyone you
My
love.
whole life, every day, all
Yeah,
day.
yeah,
That's where I
yeah.
am.
Okay, would you compete with your wife? Would you compete with your child?
No, I'm not sure
No,
what that
there's
means
a
in terms
reason
of.
why you wouldn't compete with your wife or your child, because they wouldn't love you hardly anymore, right? Because the very nature of competition is winners and losers. You don't want to make a loser out of your wife. Okay, right? Okay,
So
what I'm
your
trying.
end game is cooperation.
No, no, no. Well, we don't live through competition. We live symbiotically. We breathe oxygen that none of us create. We exhale carbon dioxide that the trees absorb. They take the carbon and make food in photosynthesis, returning oxygen to the air that allows us to breathe again. This
Yep,
is a symbiotic relationship,
that's right.
right? Yes, we
I knew
do
all
need
that before I saw the movie Avatar. Just so you know.
okay, all I'm saying is we do need competition for some things. We compete for who our mate is going to be for procreation and all types of things. We can use competition for fun, right? We can use competition to encourage us to be the best we can be. But when we use competition, and it's going to be the determination of whether someone has a house, whether someone has health care, whether someone eats today, whether someone, I mean, we compete over every job, every grade, everything, right? We've used competition for everything, right? And what it's done is worn down our capacity to see each other as humans.
I
When you're
believe that
competing,
again. I believe with it ideologically, but in terms of the pragmatic, I mean, look, we're saying the same thing. I just think that, look, we're not saying the
what's
exact same thing, because what we're saying is you're saying, okay, no private ownership, so I'm not in agreement with that. Okay, I do
no,
believe in private
no,
ownership.
no. I'm saying the problem with private ownership is the fact that we have been taught that because we own it privately, we can do anything we want with it, right? And so you know why we waste a lot? Because yes, we own stuff. It sits there. It's not being used.
I agree with that.
You right?
I agree with
Okay,
that.
but that is
There's also another elements that people can argue the other way, but that's, I'm talking
we
systems.
throw the stuff away.
Okay,
We waste stuff all
you're
the time.
arguing with me over something that I don't think I understand why you're arguing with me. What is it that you're in conflict with me about?
Okay, what I'm trying to say here is once we throw the bums in jail, those who got us in there in the first place, once we have reinvested in rebuilding the American middle class, and people are not worrying about how they're going to take care of their kids and their family and their retirement and all this other stuff, right? And we then have to, what economy are we going to have that would allow us to restore sustainability to the global economy? It cannot be the economy that requires growth. We cannot grow from where we
I
are.
totally agree with all of that. So
We,
there's no conflict. There hasn't
so
been any conflict. And what have I said on top of that? I said that
no, no.
that I'm showing you a pathway to realize $70 trillion to recreate that paradigm. So what exactly
My,
is the disconnect?
my concern here is that we need to understand why we got here in the first place. We
Right,
have to
which
fix
is
why we got here in the first place, but we have to move
so you
past.
think you think oh, so you think selfishness is the one thing we have to focus on.
No, we, in order to fix the problem, we need to elect an independent to be president, empowered by a mandate in support of the Clean New Deal, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then the president now is elected with the Clean New Deal. We have independent counsel appointed. We start to hold accountable those people who have poisoned the system with corruption
Amen. We're
and
completely on
fraud.
the same
Yeah,
page. Lock
all
and
that
step.
stuff is right. We enact a bunch of programs that absolutely need to get done in order to meet the climate crisis. We need a new global power grid that's renewable energy. There's all these programs we can do that would put Americans to work earning middle class wages, not minimum wage.
I
Okay,
agree with
all
all
right.
of that.
Those
Not to
practical
mention
things
public education, not to mention
not to mention
political
public.
thought, not to mention new technology to
That's
create
right. Those
sustainability.
practical
Please.
things have to be done. But on top of that, thereafter, we need to understand that our system of economics is going to continue to push us over the edge into insustainability territory unless we fix it. In other words, we have a system that doesn't function with equilibrium. That's what
That's all
capitalism. That's the
I've been
problem with
saying that the whole I've been saying that the whole time. But the only disconnect that we have is you've got into this more like ideological concept, which I just have been cynical
is
and jaded towards because we had that. That's how that's that. Okay, let's think
we've
of
never had that.
from an anthropological, concept. I mean, what did we go through? We went from tribes, then we ended up having agriculture to where we built city states, which created the basically hierarchy. I mean, that's humanity in a nutshell.
Well,
That's history in a nutshell, right? But there always had to be cooperation. Now, was it forced cooperation or was it harmonious cooperation? Right? I mean, that's really the idea. And so the question is, okay, so what is the globalism we're going to have? Is it a globalism of exploitation that kicks all the money to the oligarchs that the
no, it cannot be.
that
We
has
need to
tens of
move
tons of
past.
that's what because
Yes.
that's what we have, right?
Yeah.
That's what we've had, and everything from 9/11 that shows that the rest of everybody is expendable.
Yeah.
You murdered 3,000 people in front of our face. We still don't know what the hell happened. 20 years of war, where at least 4.1 million people I've seen, perish between all of the different theaters, and then you had tens of trillion, well, 6 trillion supposedly to the war on terror effort. Okay, so that's one debacle that didn't go anywhere, except for where the military industrial contractors and the politicians that they serve, who happen to be in bed with the financial system that benefits from this as well. That comes from what? Oh yeah, the fossil fuel scenario. Oh yeah, Saudi never got or got away with their role and whatever their role was in 9/11, and nobody asked questions. Why? Because now our currency and our dollar, reserve system and all the rest of it. Okay, so those are things that there's cooperation, right? Between the guys destroying everybody in the world. I always laugh because, I grew up being like, I hate the slave owner and I hate Pharaoh, right? I'm all about freedom. I'm all about liberty and ultimately cooperation. And we all work together, but you have to have the right leadership to be able to create the wisdom within the communities so that we don't have all of those elements. Regulation in its own right? Think about how gangs regulate themselves. Okay, if somebody gets out of line and piss somebody off in a gang, they get regulated, which means they get beat down. Right? There was a sort of
Yes.
situation
Yeah.
within the tribe that's like, we're going to function a specific way. You get out of line, you get beat down. That regulation for the United States of by and for the people in this systemology that you're talking about. And that's why most economists, macroeconomists especially, are full of shit with their models, because they've talked about this growth structure forever. And I knew that was all, bullshit back in the 80s when I first learned about it, right? Because it's like, wait a second, you don't have endless sea stock. I mean, or fish stock. We've seen the oceans depleted of resources. We've seen them choked with plastic. We've seen the air get polluted to the point where the global warming situation has created insane, evolution. what am I trying to say? When people like in Syria, I mean, millions of people before war and everything, mostly because of the environmental situation, then they end up, migrating is what I'm thinking about, major migration. And then they end up in Western Europe. And then there's a lot of different resources and scenarios that lead to what? More and more, conflict, particularly from the locals that are like, look, man, our resources are going to them, that we're escaping this thing, but yet we're all surviving on fossil fuel, to your point that we're all kind of interconnected, right? There's
Yeah.
no question.
Okay,
But so
so
let me just finish this one thought.
yeah,
Like I said,
sure.
halfway through this dialogue, my prediction is that we got one or two pathways forward here. And I think it's global war that only is going to benefit the people that got us here, or revolution within, and it just, what degree is the revolution? Now, will that spread globally? Will we be, in 100 years thought of as somebody that manifested a global revolution? Everybody's playing with the same situation, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and we already have a form of globalism. Why couldn't we have a globalism of cooperation? Well, I'll tell you, because there's a lot of really bad, evil people with a lot of power that will never allow us to get there unless we break the bonds of bondage once
Oh,
again.
yeah.
And the
Yeah.
only way that's going to happen, in my opinion, is in the only country on earth that actually does have a semblance of accountability if we fulfill the Clean New Deal. That's the only way. Otherwise, it's got to be mass bloodshed. And I don't know who
Well,
comes out on top of that except for the guys that have got all the weapons.
right, exactly. I'm just, it's this is a great, the value of this conversation is not just the information about the Clean New Deal that you and we both tried to put out.
That we're both
I'm
doing.
trying, yeah, that we're doing. I'm trying to encourage also a reconsideration of some of these principles that we
Sure.
take as given.
I buy that all
And
the way.
right. And so on the issue of, I know it's a third rail to talk about private ownership versus, because that always suggests communism, public ownership. I'm not advocating in
Which
that
gets
way.
us, unfortunately, to the Politburo, which is just a different
Yeah,
mechanism of who
right,
owns
right.
everything.
Exactly. I'm not advocating. Again, that's 18th century economics. What I'm trying to say here is that, okay, I own a home on on a piece of land. Okay, right. I'm gonna live what, 80 years if I'm lucky, 90 years max, whatever. Okay, the land that I'm living on, right, is going to be here, has been here for billions of years. It's going to be here for billions of years after me until the sun goes out and becomes a black hole and then the planet will go away. Okay. The
Yeah, or
idea,
the sun goes through its quasar or
crazy,
photon.
right? The idea of characterizing my use of the land that I quote unquote own as ownership, when my use of that land is the barest slip of time, right? Okay, what I'm trying to say here is, because we think of what we own as ours, and therefore we can do with it what we want to do with it, empowers us to have complete contempt for the fact that the only reason we get to use it is because generations of people before us didn't destroy it. We have a duty to the land that we use to use it in a way that preserves it for our posterity. This is why I talk about stewardship. Stewardship is all about that. Ownership in a modern context has become completely devoid of any value
Well, more
of
importantly,
future
not just
generations.
devoid, but perverted, buddy. Because see what you're
Okay.
talking about, but what we both know because of your work and you brought to us through David Webb, and then what we call through, Safe Harbor and all the rest of it, that nobody owns their property anyway. At any time,
Well, that's another story. So it is a fiction.
not
It is a
another
legal
story. It's the
fiction.
same story because the banks that are
It is a
the
legal fiction.
primary dealer brokers and the preferred creditors don't have to prove anything to come and rip you out of your fucking house. So it's all an illusion. Okay. It doesn't matter who you are. It's all an illusion anyway. So once
Well,
people wrap their heads around the fraud and the aristocracy and the tyranny, I think we're a lot closer to the harmony that you're looking for. But I've wondered this my whole life, right? It's like, I know what the North American Indians did to survive on their land. I know what the white man did. I understand the contradictions of everything that we are. And I kept trying to like do this, I don't know, negotiation with myself, right? My whole life. Okay, are we buying for the people? Do we have equality? Wait, it says it right in their documents. Wait, Martin Luther King said, "Hey, live true to what you put down on your documents." Oh, wait, and on paper. Oh, wait a second. Yeah, it wasn't true for them, but okay, it
Was
wasn't. So it's constantly ferreting all this stuff out. But then you get to the end of it, and it's like what Giannis tells us, that techno feudalism is even beyond modern monopolies, right? That we've created this technology where somebody like Jeff Bezos got rid of the entire market, for
yeah.
example,
Yes,
right?
they created their own. Yeah.
He's bringing his own rent on rent seeking, but on stuff that it's not even a market. It's something that is like the next step above, and I don't know how to articulate it as well as I
Yeah,
should.
well, is the digital version of the old company town, where one company would own all the businesses in the
Yeah, but he
town.
says it's even further than that. There's a
Oh,
part
it
of
is further than that. Yeah,
but
it's even worse than that. It's more.
yeah.
It's the digital. It's the metaverse version of that.
Look,
But
for people, because I this has been a fabulous conversation. I've got a split, but listen, man, for people that did get through all of this, I do think it's very important because I am not calling for a socialism revolution. I'm not calling for a communist revolution myself.
I'm not
Okay?
either.
And what my game is rectifying or creating a great reckoning with the corruption that exists because we have the answers. It's black and white. This isn't theory. This isn't hypothetical. What I'm telling you is $70 trillion got looted, stolen from the small class of people that have completely betrayed us all. And there's one of two choices. The founders would have been like, based on what I've read, where's the revolution? I mean, we would have had it. We should have had fucking 5 revolutions by now, but we don't have a revolution. And I'm not promulgating a violent revolution because I still think the ultimate justice here is to make the system that we have work the way it's supposed to, because people are not, they will always be flawed. No matter what we are, we're always flawed, and we will never find perfection. However, this is where I'm going to contradict myself. Okay. The human body itself is a design in perfection, minus
Mhm.
minus the fact that we couldn't go out and we couldn't compete with bears or lions or at the top. But our brain and our manifestation of our thumb and our abilities to do certain things, and the way we consume food and the energy and the compost and all the rest of it, there is a way to live in harmony. Okay. There is a way to live within sustainability. And there's also, like you said, there is room to have competition, but it's not the competition of the natural resources to exploit to the point that none of us can survive. And that's the roulette that we're all dealing with. And I'm just explaining to people that in 2024, regardless if we could ever get to a moment where it's kumbaya and, we can all live in harmony together because we're a brother's keeper and all the rest of it,
Star
that's
Trek
the whole
economy.
purpose of the law. Is the law can do what you can't do. The law with people that are been put into positions of integrity, whether they were elected or they were assigned from elected officials and so forth, have the power to go to these people that are stealing from us, make it clear, as I have in the con and the new untouchables, and say, this is so stupid that there's no way we survive, and just look around. How stupid are things? So to get to where you're going requires critical thought. It cares beauty and intelligence, and more importantly, a communal sort of, like, here's my last point. Okay. So I, like millions of people, have read Ayn Rand. Okay. And when I was younger, I was really engulfed with the idea of the original outlet, not, sorry, I was just about to make a major faux pas, of the Fountainhead. And the protagonist, whose name eludes me, who was the architect, and his pursuit of his vision and his beauty and things that he wouldn't negotiate with his own, ability to be his best virtuous self. I really personalize that and love the idea of that. And what that ultimately, I found out many years later, Howard Rourke was his name, was a libertarianism. And then, as anybody who read The Fountainhead, you ended up reading Atlas Shrugged. And the way that was pontificated was, oh, there's a group of people that are better than everybody else in society, that has to come to the top, that they're in a position to receive all of these really huge upsides because they're so much better than everybody else. And society cannot exist without them guiding us. And I thought to myself when I read that, I was like, this is a load of shit. I'm like, this is really stupid. But then I start understanding who, obviously the pseudo philosopher that Ayn Rand was, but where she came from. She came from Russia. She hated the collective because she was brought up in Stalin's, Stalin's Russia. And what that did was to ultimately, in Stalin's Russia, was everybody is going to do what we tell them to do, exactly as we tell them to do. Everybody's going to turn the gun on each other. Everybody is going to be not their brother's keeper, but their brother's cop, and that they're going to police state each other because of their own power, and they're going to take everybody else down, which gave birth to this extreme in the other direction, which was this libertarianism, right? So I'm struggling hearing all of these things with reality and all of these things that happen. And I'm like, look, at the end of the day, you break the law, like the rest of us, you go to jail. Can we try to get America first to put everybody in prison that needs to belong in prison, take back their money, show everybody that 70 trillion was done illegally, that we're going to rebuild the American middle class in the United States using that, because payback's a bitch, Wall Street, and we're going to do this. And they can call it, what do they always call it? The wealth wars, not the wealth wars. What do they always say? It's like, they always like the collective.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's like the
Yeah.
collective.
It's
It's a part of this Ayn Randian bullshit, right? It's
Yeah,
like what they do is they manipulate everybody because it's really easy to get people complicit in their vertical to hate everybody else. And it's class warfare. So
class
it's
warfare.
class
Thank you.
warfare. And they're like, but yet there has to be a class warfare against them because they're stealing and they've looted and nobody else is stepping up to them because they own the media, they own the judges, just like George Carlin told us. And this is where we are, America. So look, I mean, your idea is beautiful, okay? It really is. It's beautiful. But what I'm trying to say to the people watching this is that that if you're somebody like Joe Rogan and you hear this, the first thing you're going to hear, because people are going to talk into his ear, he's going to hear two things. He's going to hear, wow, that sounds pretty interesting and it's really amazing, and I'd like to get high and talk about that and drink some bourbon, and that's great because that's what the Yanomami tribe did down in South America that I'm into, and they hunt for their food, and that's awesome. Oh, but wait a second. Elon said that you guys are a bunch of fucking communists. No, we're not communists, dudes. What we are people that are trying to get rid of corruption to be able to understand how to create. See, the one thing that we missed from this conversation, and I really got to go, but I'm just going to finish asking you this. I believe in dynamism, okay? Like I said at the very beginning, I believe in a hybrid scenario. If you've fallen through the cracks, there's got to be a social safety net, okay? I don't want to see homelessness. I don't want to see, you can't control the mass crackhead that's going to be on the street because his life is, you can try to find him reform, but there's a lot of people on the streets that aren't like that, right? You got to get rid of homelessness. There's a social safety net. There's got to be people that, can get food if they're food dependent, and those sorts of things. That's what I believe in, because I know that we've got enough resources to do that. I know, and I've seen that, grocery stores, because I remember doing some volunteer service at a food bank where restaurants give so much food every single night that they would waste otherwise. We're talking mass volumes of food, and that goes for grocery stores as well, right? So there are ways to work around some of these huge problems that we have. But if and only if we make sure that the financial system is out of the way, that is looting everybody through all of these contextualization of lies, and we basically create a system of fairness, and you elect people to basically do what we give them the power to do. I don't see how we do it otherwise, because otherwise you end up with, and this is my biggest fear, when you look at what Lenin was versus what Putin became, and what did Putin do through all of the, I said Putin, Stalin. What did Stalin do during the great, what was the first purge, where it was all of the farms, right? They basically took over the collective ownership of the farms. You remember that? In the 1920s, I believe, right?
1920. So this is after the fight between the Bolsheviki and the Mensheviki.
That's right.
Right.
Lenin
And
comes
the
in.
Bolsheviki won out. The Mensheviki were actually more democratic, like Scandinavia. They were
Okay,
that version.
gotcha.
And the
But
Bolsheviki is Stalin.
they murdered millions of
Oh,
farmers.
yes, yes,
They
that's right.
murdered millions of farmers, and then ultimately, I mean, like they murdered like 20 million before World War II. And then they lost another 25 million during World War II. And thank God they were willing to go the distance against Hitler, because we would probably still have Hitler. Maybe not. Maybe we would have beat him, but I don't know if we would have lost 20 million people in the process. I mean, what the Soviet Union did was unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
But in the end, you know, and I've got so much respect for the Russian people. But boy, are they hard people, right? And if you read, and
Some
like
serious folks. That's right. That's
you know,
right.
and I wish I could read Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky, and some of the great, you know, the literature
Yes.
from Russia is magnificent, right? And so they've got this storied, insane past, you know, with all of the, you know, the 400 years of the what was the
Deeply rich culture. No,
yeah,
absolutely.
incredible, right? But at the same time, it's their the illusion is, with all of the stuff they tried to manifest, in the end, the difference between the Romanovs and Stalin is nuance in terms of the Politburo. It's they still had absolute freaking control. And as I read recently in this treatment that I'm doing, I'm trying to get this film off the ground that deals with Russia now is a criminal state. It is a mafia state, and that all happened in the transition from, you know,
But
perestroika.
you would agree that America is too.
Of course, no, we're the king class of it. The whole world is. That's what I'm saying. Of
Exactly.
power.
Yeah.
And they've created an international oligarchic class that uses corruption to extract from everybody so that we can prop up the new pharaohs. That's what I'm trying. And see what you've said here in terms of sustainability and moving forward and everything else. Yeah, that's if people understood what is at stake, and if we came together as one out of our silos to work towards the Clean New Deal to basically take that power away from them. We could do it like that, but we need tens of millions of
Millions.
people to break the power.
Yep. We can do this. People, check out Sean Fain. Check out Sean Fain. We can do this. Patrick, thank you so much for the conversation.
I hope it's
Great
not too tiring
conversation.
for you. I'm tired, man.
No, well, oh no, this is exhilarating, but hey, more to come. I know you got to go. Thank you everyone who was able to stick with us and stuff like that. We please, please, please consider donating $13 for our revolution
Thank you for
and
saying
stuff
that.
like that. Absolutely. Please, please, please go to thecon.tv to find out the truth of how America has been ransacked, you know, by and looted by some of the worst sociopaths imaginable, right? And how they got away with it and everything, and what we can do to fix it.
We're going to get to where you described, okay, and what you believe in. But the question is whether we get there through an evolution, through critical thinking and common sense, and the people exercising their power, or through mass misery. It's going to happen one way or the other. But I think we're at that critical juncture that determines which direction it goes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Patrick. This was a great conversation. You take care, my friend.
Thank you, man. All the best to you, Kevin. All the best to everybody out there. Take care. Bye.